Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Jesse McCartney titled In Technicolor. So okay, about a year ago, I went to go see the Backstreet Boys live in concert. Surprise, surprise, it was a great show. All five of them, they sound fantastic, they're still stellar dancers, and the multi-part harmonies were just paired with some killer pop hits that have allowed them to sell out some pretty sizable venues over 15 years into their careers, even if you're not a fan of the group, or you think that the 90 boy band should have been stayed in that decade and been rightfully forgotten, as I know some of you do. It'd be hard to deny that the Backstreet Boys' longevity and stage production of that show was pretty damn solid, all things considered. But what surprised me most about that concert was the opening act. Jesse McCartney, an act of who the majority of you probably forgot existed, but who was briefly relevant in the spotlight in the somewhat confused pop charts of the late 2000s, around the beginning of the club boom, with his two major singles, Leave In and How Do You Sleep. And honestly, I really liked Leave In, and a few re-listens remind me of why. The electronic elements, they were very tasteful, it was confident and sincere without being anything close to insufferable, and the abuse of auto-tune that plagued R&B inspired pop songs of that era was mostly muted and tuned back. It was the definition of the sort of slick pop song Justin Timberlake could knock out of the park in his sleep, and unsurprisingly, the comparisons started immediately and were mostly pretty unfair. Because honestly, both acts, they were in different lanes here. Justin Timberlake was gunning for Michael Jackson's throne along with Usher and Chris Brown, where Jesse McCartney had his eyes more on the blue-eyed soul of the past. And thus, I really shouldn't be surprised that when he finally managed to get that fourth album released with the success of classier acts like Sam Smith, neo-soul acts seemed primed for chart success. It wasn't any surprise that Jesse McCartney came back. And since I really did like when I saw him live, and I was curious to see more, I took a look at this new album in Technicolor. How is it? Well, it's pretty good, but at the same time, it's an album that can't help but feel just a little bit anonymous at points. Sure, for the most part, the music is solid and enjoyable in a breezy, infectious sort of way, but there are points that it could have afforded to push the gauntlet in the pop R&B vein just a little bit harder to make the album really stand out and be something special. In other words, while there are a few moments on In Technicolor that certainly do have that flashy Technicolor shade, other points just feel a little bit washed out. So, okay, let's start with Jesse McCartney himself. Honestly, I've got few complaints of the guy. It's clear that he's giving every single song on this album his absolute all, and it definitely helps matters that Jesse McCartney is stepping up to the microphone more confident and poised and polished than ever before, and he's got the pipes to really back it up, especially in his clear and strong falsetto range. What it also does do is reintroduce the Justin Timberlake comparisons. And you know, I honestly think Jesse McCartney holds his own. JT might be the born superstar in the vein of icy, dominant sexuality in that brand of R&B, but McCartney's brand has a certain breezy charm to it that is looser and slightly more expressive, which allows him to introduce more of a sense of humor, which JT never really brought to his work outside of the stuff he did with The Lonely Island. Now that said, this comparison isn't always favorable, which takes us to instrumentation and production, where this album falls into one of two categories: the disco-inspired pop R&B of the late 70s and the early 80s, and the icy, minimalist, reverb-saturated realm of modern R&B. And the split in inspiration and energy between these two categories is palpable, because Jesse McCartney is a born fit for the slightly cheesy but irrepressibly fun R&B of that older era, a lot of the same reason why Bruno Mars went back to that time. And with the punchy percussion, the horns, the funkier guitar, and the bass infused with some surprisingly well-integrated modern electronic synth effects that never go too hard on the reverb, we get a selection of really great pop songs. Back Together, Young Loved, and Tie the Knot, they are great examples of these sort of tracks, and they bring together some pretty solid grooves, all things considered, that show old school flavor without ever really being considered as throwbacks. Now, unfortunately, the other half of this record is much more in line with modern R&B that shows more than a passing glimpse at Justin Timberlake, and the results are much more mixed. Don't get me wrong, I like the aggressive bass of Superbad, the swirling haze and punch of So Cool. That reminded me a bit of Lupe Fiasco's Superstar instrumentally, and that's a good thing. And the echoing, interweaving keyboards of the bonus track track, Catch and Release, it made that one of the clear highlights of the record. But in the middle of this album, you just get a stretch of songs like Checkmate, Goodie Bag, Punch Drunk Recreation, and In Technicolor Part 2 that are just so clearly trying to imitate JT's template and are just nowhere near as effective because, let's be honest, the producer, it's not Timbaland here. And while I did like the horns on Punch Drunk Recreation, the mix feels very watery and a lot less fun, and the same thing could be said for Goodie Bag with a really bad synth choice there. Just did not work for me. And now we've got to come to lyrics and themes. And let me stress that when Jesse McCartney sticks with upbeat, charming, and something of a goofy way sort of songs, his sincerity can lend a lot of character, fun, and soul to this record. I love the excess of 80s references in Young Love, the earnest marriage proposal in Tie the Knot, and the admiring of the girl track on songs like So Cool and Superbad that worked pretty well, even despite the implicit bragging lurking beneath them. But where this album stumbles lyrically is when Jesse McCartney tries to play a more hard-edged, sex-driven character. And not only is it a really bad fit for his too earnest songwriting and delivery, it doesn't always come across as remotely flattering. Now, for example, All About Us, it's the song questioning commitment to a part-time relationship who wants to make it full-time. And you know what? I'm expected to believe this is an actual dilemma for Jesse McCartney. He just doesn't sell it well. Or take Checkmate, a breakup song that uses a lot of conflict metaphors that reflect a certain amount of arrogance in the songwriting. That's just a really poor picture for Jesse McCartney. It does not fit him. And Punch Drunk Recreation's club player image, that's an even worse fit for him. It just does not work. The worst track on this album, however, is Goodie Bag, where Jesse McCartney compares his girl to the bag in question. And look, do I even need to write the bad jokes that come with such a comparison? You guys do it in the comments. I don't want to. That said, there are two songs on this album that I thought were really quite well written, showed a fair amount of nuance on this record. The piano ballad, The Other Guy, and the breakup bonus track, Catch and Release. Now, the first is set in a bedside conversation with the girl after cheating with Jesse McCartney, and he tries to convince her that it probably worked better with him and for her to actually step up and make a choice here, because he knows exactly how it feels to get cheated on in this vein. And what works here is the raw sincerity. It's very clear Jesse McCartney wants to be with the girl on this track, but he's very much aware that in the end, it's her choice, and he's not going to really pressure her that hard. And that additional consideration in the framing comes up very well in Catch and Release, which is a surprisingly mature song where the girl is cheating on Jesse McCartney and she's sleeping around, something that he's definitely not up for, yet he preferred that she just be honest and break things off and enjoy herself sleeping with whoever she wants, because there's nothing really wrong with that. He says that in the song. If they were better off as friends, then do that. He just wants her to be honest with him, and that takes a lot of the bitterness out of the song and makes it surprisingly progressive and pretty mature, which you rarely see in this brand of R&B, which I appreciate. Even though the parting shot that she'd probably get pregnant if she kept sleeping around is just a little bit in poor taste. Did not appreciate that. But you know what? Putting aside Justin Timberlake comparisons, I really quite liked In Technicolor by Jesse McCartney. Look, it's not going to change pop music, or it's not going to even blow your mind, but it's a solid reintroduction to the guy, and it shows that he's matured into a pretty solid songwriter who knows enough to draw upon solid tropes of the past, even if his usage of current trends is a little bit shaky. As it is, I do feel it could have used a little bit more punch in the songwriting, and the modern production could have been a little bit tighter and better formed, which means I'm ultimately going to give this record a pretty strong 6 out of 10. But you know what? If you got a taste for this brand of pop R&B, give Jesse McCartney another listen. He deserves it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at both earlier in this year or later coming out later this year, or if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm more than happy to hear about it. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.